Jake had always felt out of place in a world full of advanced civilizations. Humans were the newcomers to the galactic stage, often seen as naive and weak by other species. But when the Zorith, a powerful and ancient race, decided to give humanity a chance, Jake was chosen to represent Earth. His job was simple: act as an ambassador, build relationships, and prove that humans had a place in the galaxy. He wasn't special. Not really. Sure, Jake had a good education, a decent job, and the confidence of someone who had seen a lot of the world. But in the grand scheme of things, he was just another human. No one expected him to do anything extraordinary, but that changed the day he met Arya. Arya was different from anyone Jake had ever met. She was a member of the Zion, a peaceful species known for their calm nature and keen intellect. She had been assigned to guide Jake through the complexities of the Zorith's vast empire, but to Jake, she seemed more like an assistant than a true companion. Arya was quiet, reserved, and incredibly professional, everything Jake had been taught to expect from the Zion at first. Jake didn't think much of her. She was simply doing her job, guiding him through meetings and ensuring he didn't make any mistakes in front of the high-ranking officials. She never showed any emotion, at least not outwardly. She was all business, and Jake respected that. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than she let on. They spent most of their time together traveling from one world to the next, attending endless diplomatic events, and meeting with representatives from various alien species. Jake couldn't help but feel like a fish out of water. The Zorith were imposing, their ships massive and intimidating, their culture unlike anything he had ever encountered. Still, Arya was always there, always watching him, always guiding him. She never offered much in terms of personal conversation, but Jake began to notice the little things. The way she observed the galaxy with an almost childlike curiosity. The way her eyes seemed to light up when she spoke about her homeworld. The way she would often glance out the window of their ship, lost in thought. There were moments, brief but real, when Jake caught a glimpse of something behind Arya's calm exterior. It wasn't much, just the faintest hint of a smile or the softening of her gaze when they shared a moment of silence. But it was enough to make Jake wonder one day, while they were aboard the Zorith's largest space station. A diplomatic event was scheduled with representatives from several different species. Jake had been nervous about the meeting, unsure of how he would be received. It wasn't often that humans were invited to these kinds of gatherings, and Jake knew the pressure was on him to make a good impression. Arya had been preparing him for days, coaching him on the intricacies of alien customs, but nothing could ease his nerves. They arrived at the event early, and Jake stood nervously by the door, watching the dignitaries file in. Arya stood beside him, as composed as ever. She didn't seem to be affected by the pressure at all. But Jake noticed her eyes soft, yet focused, glancing around as if taking in the scene. Then it happened. One of the representatives, a tall alien with blue skin and shimmering scales, made an unexpected comment, something about the human's ability to adapt. The words were intended as a compliment, but they came off as condescending. Jake's face flushed with embarrassment, but before he could respond, Arya stepped forward. Without a word, she flashed a small smile at Jake, a soft, genuine smile that made his heart skip a beat. It was the first time he had seen her smile. Like that, it wasn't the polite, professional smile she often gave to others. No, this was different. This smile was personal. It was as if in that moment, she was reassuring him. Everything would be fine. Jake blinked, caught off guard. Arya's smile faded as quickly as it appeared, and she turned back to face the alien representative, her expression returning to its usual calm demeanor. But for Jake, that brief moment meant everything. He felt a connection to her, a bond that had been building without either of them realizing it. It was as if, in that single fleeting moment, Arya had shown him something more than just a professional companion. She had shown him a glimpse of who she really was. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jake found himself distracted, replaying that smile in his mind over and over. It was odd. He had barely known Arya, and yet in that moment, he felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't expected. He had always thought of her as just an alien guide, a companion to help him navigate this strange new world. but now he wasn't so sure. Later that night, as they boarded their ship to leave the station, Jake found himself walking alongside Arya. She was silent, as usual, but Jake couldn't ignore the warmth that had grown between them since that smile. There was something there, something real, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. As they passed through the corridors of the ship, Jake glanced at Arya. For a moment their eyes met, and he saw something flicker in her gaze, something that mirrored his own feelings. "Thank you," Jake said softly, unsure of why he said it, but needing to. Arya didn't say anything at first. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice soft and genuine. And for the first time since meeting her, Jake saw the faintest smile tug at the corners of her lips. It was a small smile, but it was enough to make Jake's heart. The next few days passed in a haze for Jake. Ever since Arya had smiled at him at the diplomatic event, things felt different. He couldn't get her smile out of his mind. It was such a small gesture, yet it left a mark on him that he didn't know how to explain. Jake had seen many smiles before, of course, but this one felt personal. For some reason, it meant more to him than anything else that had happened since he arrived in the galaxy. He found himself seeking out Arya more and more, wanting to talk to her, to learn more about her. She had always been the calm and collected one, the one who kept things in order. But now, he was starting to see her differently. He didn't just want her to be his guide anymore. He wanted to know her, to understand the quiet strength she held beneath her cool exterior. But Arya didn't make it easy. Despite the growing bond between them, she still kept things professional. She remained polite and composed, offering her help when needed, but never more than that. It was as if she had built an invisible wall around herself, one that Jake couldn't quite get through. One evening, after a long day of meetings and travel, they found themselves alone in the ship's observation deck. The stars outside shimmered against the blackness of space, and Jake stood at the window, watching the distant lights of other ships as they passed by. He wasn't really looking at them. He was lost in his thoughts, his mind replaying the moments with Arya that had made his heart race. "You're quiet tonight," Arya said from behind him. Jake turned, startled by her sudden appearance. Stood a few feet away, her eyes watching him carefully. "Just thinking," Jake said, offering a small smile. "It's hard not to, with all of this going on." Arya didn't reply immediately, but she stepped closer, her soft footsteps barely making a sound. She looked out the window too, her gaze distant. "I understand this is a lot to take in." Jake nodded, his hands resting on the cold glass of the window. "How do you do it?" he asked, turning to face her. "The time? I'm barely keeping it together." Arya gave him a small, understanding smile, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "It's not about staying calm," she said softly. "It's about understanding the bigger picture. The galaxy is vast, and there are so many forces at play. The key is not to let the small things distract you. Focus on what matters." Jake studied her for a moment, his curiosity growing. He had never really considered her point of view. He'd seen her as a guide, a companion assigned to help him through this complex world. But he hadn't thought much about what she had gone through. "That sounds like something you've learned over time," he said, his voice gentle. "You're not just a guide, are you?" Arya didn't immediately respond. Instead, she seemed to contemplate his words. "No," she said after a long pause. "I've lived through a lot. My people, the Zion, have faced many challenges, especially with the other species who look down on us. We've had to learn how to survive, how to adapt to circumstances beyond our control." Jake's heart went out to her. He'd never really asked about her past, and hearing her speak so honestly about it made him feel like he had been missing something important. She wasn't just a calm and collected companion. She was a survivor, someone who had lived through struggles and had come out stronger for it. "I didn't know," Jake admitted, feeling guilty for not asking sooner. "I've been so caught up in my own issues, I never took the time to learn about you." Arya met his gaze then, her eyes soft. "You don't have to feel bad. It's not easy for anyone to share their past, I understand." They stood there, In silence for a while, both staring out at the stars, Jake's thoughts swirled in his mind. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something new, something he wasn't sure he was ready for but couldn't ignore. As the hours passed, they continued to talk. The conversation flowed easily now, as if the walls between them had slowly started to come down. They spoke about their homes, their dreams, and the things they longed for in the vastness of space. Arya told him about the beauty of her homeworld, a place of vast oceans and quiet forests, a place that was as peaceful as her people. Jake shared stories about Earth, about the way humans had struggled, but had never given up. Always fighting for a future, even when things seemed impossible. By the time the conversation slowed, the ship had entered a new star system. The stars outside the window had shifted, and the dark space around them seemed to stretch endlessly. Arya looked out the window one last time before turning back to Jake. "This is the way the galaxy works," she said softly. "We all have our own stories, our own struggles, but we also have our own strength." Jake nodded, feeling something inside him shift. He had always thought of himself as small in the grand scheme of things. But with Arya's words, he began to see that there was more to him and to her than they both realized. Before they left the observation deck, Jake caught Arya's gaze. Once more, this time, there was no professional distance between them. It was just a quiet understanding. "I think I'm starting to understand," Jake said, his voice soft but certain. "I think I'm starting to see what you mean." Arya smiled at him again this time, not a fleeting gesture, but something real. It wasn't just a smile of reassurance. It was a smile that spoke of trust, of shared moments, and perhaps even the beginning of something more. For the first time, Jake felt like he wasn't just an ambassador. He felt like he was part of something bigger, part of a universe that, despite all its complexities, was beginning to make sense. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone. Jake could no longer deny that something was changing between him and Arya. What had started as a simple diplomatic mission had evolved into something more complex. He hadn't expected it. He wasn't sure what to call it, but whatever it was, he knew it was real. It had been weeks since that night on the observation deck, and Jake couldn't stop thinking about their conversations. They had shared parts of themselves that he had never expected to hear. He had learned about Arya's people, the Zion, their peaceful culture, and the trials they had faced from other species in the galaxy. She had told him how her people were once powerful, but had been forced into a quieter existence. Their strength lay not in their military power, but in their ability to adapt, to survive, to remain calm in the face of conflict. Arya had explained how the Zion had been isolated for centuries, their peaceful ways often misunderstood by others. Despite everything, they still remained hopeful. Jake admired her more with each story she shared, each piece of her life that she opened up to him. But it wasn't just her past that fascinated him. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she spoke with such confidence, but also with the humility that came from understanding her place in the universe. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's dining hall, Jake felt an unusual sense of comfort. It was a simple meal, nothing fancy, but the atmosphere was warm. The soft hum of the ship and the distant stars outside gave the moment a calmness that was hard to describe. Arya was seated across from him, as calm as ever, but there was something different about the way she looked at him tonight. Something that made Jake's heart race just a little faster. "Arya," Jake began, breaking the silence, "you've been through a lot. I've heard your stories, and I admire your strength. But I've been wondering, why are you helping me? I'm just one human. I can't offer your people anything special." Arya looked up from her meal, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. "It's not about what you can offer," she said gently. "It's about understanding the value of connection. The Zion have always believed in building relationships. We're not as isolated as others think. We may be small in number, but we're powerful in our unity. Helping you, Jake, it's about more than just diplomacy. It's about something bigger." Jake's mind raced with her words. It was clear that Arya wasn't just talking about political alliances or trade agreements. She was talking about a deeper understanding, a bond that transcended species and borders. And in that moment, Jake realized that the connection he was feeling with her wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was something real, something meaningful. The days that followed were filled with more quiet moments, more talks under the stars. They spent hours walking the corridors of the ship, talking about everything and nothing at all. They laughed, shared their dreams, and slowly their friendship grew. But Jake couldn't ignore the feeling that kept growing in his chest. It wasn't just friendship anymore. There was something deeper, something unspoken. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting with a group of Zorth officials, Jake found himself in the ship's garden, trying to clear his mind. The stress of the diplomatic negotiations had left him drained, and he needed a moment to himself. But as he walked through the lush, artificial greenery, he spotted Arya sitting by the fountain. Her eyes closed as she enjoyed the peace of the space. Without thinking, Jake sat down next to her, the soft rustling of the leaves the only sound. Between them, Arya opened her eyes and smiled when she saw him. It was a quiet smile, but it meant more than any words could convey. There was no need for explanation, no need for questions. They just sat there together, the weight of the galaxy temporarily forgotten. "I've been thinking," Jake began after a long silence. "About what you said, about the Zion, about the value of connection. I think I'm starting to understand." "What you mean?" Arya turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "What do you understand, Jake?" "I understand that there's more to all of this than just the job we were given," he said, his voice low. "I've spent so much time focused on the mission, on what I was supposed to do, that I didn't stop to think about why we're really here. Why you're here. Why I'm here." Arya didn't say anything for a long while, but Jake could feel her gaze on him, the weight of her attention steady and unwavering. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You're not alone in this." "Jake," she said, her words a simple truth, "none of us are. Not really. The galaxy is full of people and species who are all searching for something they can't always explain. Sometimes it's not about the destination. It's about the journey, who we meet along the way." Jake's heart skipped a beat. In that moment, everything seemed to click. He wasn't just an ambassador anymore. He wasn't just representing Earth. He was part of something bigger. And so was she. As the days turned into weeks, Jake and Arya's connection grew stronger. They no longer just shared the same space. They shared their thoughts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. What had started as a simple partnership had evolved into something deeper, something neither of them could ignore. One evening, as the ship drifted through a nebula, their ship's lights dimming to match the colors outside, Jake found himself looking at Arya in a new light. She was no longer just a guide, a companion. She was someone who had touched his life in ways he couldn't explain. He had never thought he would feel this way about someone from another species, but now it seemed almost impossible not to. As if reading his thoughts, Arya turned to him and smiled. This time it was different. It wasn't just a simple smile. It was a smile that spoke volumes. It was a smile that made Jake's heart race. It made him feel like he had finally found something that mattered in a universe that had always seemed so vast and uncertain. "I'm glad you're here, Jake," Arya said softly, her voice full of meaning. Jake didn't need to say anything in return. The smile on his face said it all. The unspoken bond between them had been formed, and there was no turning back. The days on the ship had started to feel like a routine for Jake, but it was a routine he didn't mind. Every day he and Arya spent more time together, getting to know each other better. The quiet moments shared in the ship's garden, the long conversations under the stars, and the simple smiles exchanged between them all seemed to bring them closer. But Jake knew something had to change soon. The mission he was on was still important, and his role as Earth's representative had its weight. Still, he couldn't ignore what was growing between him and Arya. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. It started with a message, a distress signal from a nearby planet. The message was short but urgent. "We need help. The Krylar are attacking." Krylar were a ruthless, war-hungry species known for their cruelty and their desire for domination. They had been a thorn in the side of many peaceful species in the galaxy, and now it seemed they had set their sights on this peaceful, uninhabited world. Jake felt a pang of concern. "What do we do?" he asked Arya, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of worry. Arya didn't hesitate. "We must go. Can't leave them to the Kryler." Jake nodded. The decision was clear. They needed to act fast. The ship's engines roared to life, and within hours they were approaching the troubled planet. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, Jake could see the signs of destruction. Buildings were crumbling, fires were raging, and in the distance, the smoke from the battles could be seen rising into the sky. The Kryler were ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out anyone in their way. Arya's calm demeanor didn't falter, but Jake could see the tension in her posture. She knew the stakes were high. They couldn't afford to fail. As the ship touched down, Jake felt a mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It wasn't about representing Earth. This was about saving lives. They landed on the outskirts of the city, the sound of their ship's engines barely audible over the distant sounds of explosions. Jake turned to Arya, ready to ask what their next move would be, but before he could speak, Arya was already moving. Her eyes were focused, her steps purposeful. "We need to find the Kryler's leader," she said. "Now, if we can stop him, we can end this." Jake nodded, following her as she led. The way through the ruins of the city, the destruction around them was overwhelming. But Arya moved with a sense of purpose that calmed Jake. She wasn't just a guide anymore. She was a leader, a warrior in her own right. They navigated the city streets, avoiding the wreckage and the occasional firefight. Jake had never seen Arya like this before. She was calm, composed, and yet there was a fire in her eyes that Jake had never noticed before. It was a determination that made him feel like they could face anything together, after what felt like hours of searching. They finally found the Kryler's base of operations. It was a heavily fortified building, guarded by soldiers armed with advanced weapons. The Kryler were not to be underestimated. Jake could see the looks of fear and desperation on the faces of the people they passed. This was a battle they couldn't afford to lose. Arya turned to Jake, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Stay close. We need to move quickly." Jake didn't say anything. He simply nodded. In that moment, he knew that everything they had been through had led to this. He wasn't just following orders anymore. He was fighting for something bigger than himself. He was fighting for a future, for peace, for the people who had placed their trust in him. Together, they crept through the shadows, moving past guards and slipping into the building. The Kryler soldiers were well trained, but they weren't expecting to intruders. Arya's agility and skill were evident as she silently took down one guard after another. Jake followed her lead, his heart pounding in his chest as they made their way deeper into the heart of the building. Finally, they reached the control room. Inside, the Kryler leader stood, his back turned as he observed the destruction on the planet below. He was tall, with dark, menacing eyes that seemed to radiate power and malice. "You," the Kryler leader said, turning to face them. His voice was cold and filled with arrogance. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing. Just a human and a Zion weak, pathetic creatures. You'll never defeat me." Jake felt the sting of his words, but he refused to back down. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice steady. Arya stepped forward, her eyes locked on the Kryler leader. "You underestimate us," she said quietly, but her words were filled with a strength that Jake hadn't expected. "We are more than what you think." The Kryler leader smirked, raising his weapon. But before he could take another step, Arya moved. She was faster than Jake had ever seen her. In a blur of motion, she disarmed the leader, knocking him to the ground with a single, precise strike. Jake's eyes widened. He had seen Arya as a guide, someone who helped him navigate the galaxy's complexities. But now he saw her as something more. She was a fighter, a protector, and someone who had the strength to stand up to the worst of the galaxy. In that moment, Jake realized that he wasn't just in awe of her strength. He was in awe of who she was. The Kryler leader was subdued, his weapon taken from him. With him captured, the battle was over. The people of the planet were safe, and the Kryler's attack had been stopped as they made their way back to the ship. Jake couldn't help but glance at Arya. She was silent, her expression unreadable. But there was a subtle change in the way she looked at him. Okay. For the first time. There was something unspoken between them, a connection that had been formed through the battle, through the shared struggle. "You were amazing," Jake said quietly, his voice filled with awe. Arya gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We were amazing," she corrected him gently. Jake nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. She wasn't just his guide. Dee was his partner. And that smile, that small, quiet smile, meant more than any words. The battle had ended, and the planet was safe. But for Jake, the events of the past few days weighed heavily on his mind. He had seen Arya in a completely new light. She wasn't just his guide anymore. She wasn't just a calm professional, alien assigned to assist him. She was a warrior. She was strong, intelligent, and compassionate. She had saved lives, fought with courage, and led the way when others faltered. As the ship lifted off from the surface of the planet, Jake found himself sitting alone in his quarters, reflecting on everything that had happened. The adrenaline from the battle was slowly wearing off, leaving behind a quiet sense of awe. He had always known that Arya was different, but he had never truly understood how much until now. The door to his quarters chimed, interrupting his thoughts. He stood up, quickly smoothing out his uniform, and opened the door to find Arya standing in the doorway. She looked as composed as ever, but Jake could see a flicker of something in her eyes, something that matched the way he was feeling inside. "Wanted to check in on you," Arya said softly, her voice calm but filled with concern. "After everything that happened, I thought you might need a moment." Jake smiled at her, grateful for her concern. "Thanks, Arya. I've just been thinking a lot about everything, about what happened, about you." Arya stepped into the room, her eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. "You don't have to say anything, Jake. I know how overwhelming everything can be." But Jake wasn't sure he could keep his thoughts to himself anymore. What he had been feeling, what had been growing inside him for weeks, needed to be said. He took a deep breath, his heart racing as he finally spoke the words he had been holding back. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through. About everything we've faced together. I can't ignore it anymore. I can't ignore what I'm feeling." Arya didn't say anything, but her gaze softened. She took a step closer, waiting for Jake to continue. "I know this may sound strange, and I know we've only known each other for a short time," Jake said, his voice quiet but steady, "but I've never felt this way before. The way you fight, the way you protect those around you, the way you care for people, it's all so much more than I ever expected. And it's more than just admiration, it's something deeper, something I can't ignore." Jake's breath caught in his throat as he finally looked directly into Arya's eyes. "I care about you, Arya. I don't know how or when it happened, but I do. I can't keep pretending like I don't feel it." For a moment, there was silence between them. Arya didn't move, didn't speak. Her expression remained unreadable, and Jake's heart thudded in his chest as he wondered if he had said too much. But then, to his surprise, Arya reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm, double quotes, "Jake, ... She began, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the only one who's felt this. I've felt it too." Jake's heart skipped a beat, looked at her, searching her eyes for any hint of uncertainty, but there was none. Her gaze was steady, warm, and filled with the same emotion he had just admitted to. "I've been fighting this for a while now," Arya continued, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. "I've always kept my feelings under control, always. Maintained a certain distance. But with you, Jake, it's different. I've never felt like this about anyone, not like this." He hadn't known what to expect, but hearing Arya say those words was all he needed to know. They both felt the same way. It wasn't just a passing moment or a fleeting connection, it was something real. He stepped closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't want this to be something we ignore. I want to know where this can go. I want to see what we can be together." Arya's eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was the same smile Jake had seen before, the the one that had first sparked something between them, but this time it was different. This time, it held more meaning, more depth. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Jake," Arya said, softly, her voice full of sincerity. "But I do know this. We've already faced so much together, and we're still standing. Maybe that's the most important thing. Maybe that's where we start." Jake reached out and gently cupped her face. In his hands, the touch was soft, but it held all the emotions he had been feeling for so long: hope, gratitude, and a deep connection that had only grown stronger over time. He leaned in, his heart racing, and kissed her. It was a simple kiss, but it felt like everything they had been through together, everything they had shared, had led to this moment. And as they pulled away, both of them breathless, Jake knew that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. "I don't know where this journey will take us," Jake said quietly, "but I know I want to go through it with you." Arya smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "Then let's start, Jake. Let's take this one step at a time." Jake nodded, a sense of peace settling in his chest. Whatever the future held, whatever challenge, the days following Jake and Arya's quiet revelation were filled with a new kind of peace. The tension that had once filled the air between them was gone. What had started as a simple mission of diplomacy had evolved into something more meaningful, something neither of them had expected but both welcomed. The ship continued its journey through the galaxy, visiting various planets and meeting different species. But for Jake and Arya, the mission had taken a back seat to something more important: each other. Their connection had deepened, and it was clear to both of them that they had become more than just partners in a diplomatic mission. They were something else, something real. One morning, as they stood in the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars, Jake turned to Arya. She was standing next to him, her eyes focused on the swirling nebula outside, but there was a sense of quiet understanding between them. It was in the way their bodies seemed to lean toward each other without effort, the way their gazes seemed to align without needing words. "I've been thinking," Jake said quietly, breaking the silence, "about everything we've been through, about what's next for us." Double quotes. Arya turned to him, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "And what have you decided?" she asked, her voice as calm as ever. Jake took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "Don't know what the future holds," he said honestly, "but I know I want you by my side. I want to see where this goes." Arya's lips curled into a small smile, her eyes shining with warmth. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said softly. "We've faced so much together, and yet we've only just begun. We've been through battles, through moments of fear and uncertainty, and we've come out stronger. Together." Jake smiled back, his heart swelling with affection. "Together," he echoed. It was a simple word, but it held so much meaning between them. It wasn't just about facing challenges, it was about the strength they had found in each other, the trust, the care, the bond that had grown between them. "I never imagined I'd be in a place like this," Jake continued, his voice filled with sincerity. "When I first set foot on this ship, I was just a human, uncertain of my place in the galaxy. But now, I feel like I've found something worth fighting for, something real." Arya stepped closer to him, her expression softening. "You've found more than that, Jake," she said quietly. "You've found a partner, a companion, someone who sees you for who you truly are, beyond the role you've been given, and that's more than enough." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had always known he wasn't just another ambassador or human in the galaxy. But to hear Arya say those words, to hear her acknowledge the person he had become alongside her, meant more than he could express. "I want to build a future, Arya," Jake said, his voice filled with determination. "Not just for Earth, but for both of us. For everything we've learned and everything we'll still learn together. I don't know what's out there, but I know I want to face it with you." Arya's eyes shimmered with emotion, and for a moment there was a quiet stillness between. Then she placed a hand gently on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "I want that too," she whispered. "We've always been told that peace is fleeting, that the galaxy is full of conflict and uncertainty. But maybe we can be the change." Maybe we can show others that there's more than just fighting. There's strength in unity, in understanding, in connection. Jake nodded, his chest swelling with pride. Together, we can show them. The ship continued its journey, but for Jake and Arya, everything had shifted. Their bond was no longer just about surviving the galaxy. It was about embracing the unknown together, about creating something new. A future where they didn't just represent their people, they represented each other as they sat side by side in the observation deck. Watching the stars drift by, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from knowing everything would be easy. It wasn't about avoiding the challenges ahead. It was the peace that came from knowing they would face whatever came together, that no matter what, they would have each other. I think about all the people we've met, the planets we visited, Jake said, his voice thoughtful. It's strange how so many different species can exist in one galaxy, so many different lives, different struggles. But in the end, we're all searching for the same thing. Arya smiled softly, her eyes distant as she gazed out at the stars. Connection, she said, her voice filled with quiet wisdom. We're all searching for connection. A way to reach out, to understand, to be understood. And sometimes it's not about being the strongest. It's about finding the right people to stand with you. Jake turned to her, his heart filled with gratitude. I'm glad I found you, Arya. In this vast, chaotic galaxy, I'm glad I found you. Arya's smile deepened, her hand gently brushing against his. And I'm glad I found you, Jake. Together, they sat in silence, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The galaxy was vast, filled with challenges and unknowns. But with Arya by his side, Jake felt ready for whatever lay ahead. As the stars twinkled outside the window,
Jake knew one thing for certain.
their journey was far from over. It had only just